Deportiva y con swing.
Deportiva y con swing.
La factoría del deporte desde New York para ti. Es una máquina.
Es una máquina
Pensada para ti.
pensada para ti. Número uno en las redes, dale like y compartir.
Con informaciones importantes siempre frescas.
Y con entrevistas que te ponen de cabeza.
Lo mejor del deporte lo encontrarás aquí.
Búscale en las redes, dale like y compartir.
Suscríbete,
Ay sí,
infórmate.
ok. Dale a la campana para que te llegue.
We signed Dylan Bundy to a 1-year contract today with a club option in 2023. I'll just give kind of the broad strokes on it. We've had some conversations with Dylan, with his agent, about this potential fit. He really saw us as a really good fit from the get-go. And as we had more conversations, he's a guy who we liked a number of years ago, tried to acquire via trade, even back in his Baltimore days. Had a really good 2020 and a shortened season. And we think there's ways, he dealt with some injuries toward the end of this year, which I think caught up to him a little bit. But we feel like with a full off season and a good plan going into next spring training, this is a guy we think has a real bounce back ability, and a guy we've always liked. So happy to take any questions on this. I could definitely talk about anything from this morning too. Sorry I did bounce out quickly because there were lots of other conversations going on.
How much was the slider an attractive piece to his game?
Yeah, I think, he's a guy who early on in his career, one of the challenges, I think pitching at Baltimore was a challenge, for a lot of pitchers, and particularly fly ball oriented guy, and someone who we felt like we could maybe adapt a little differently in a different environment. I think he adapted some of that in 2020, but some of that was the use of the slider and the way he used his forcing fastball. And we just think there's really, again, a little bit untapped potential there that we can hopefully get into this year with a normal spring training, normal off season, and otherwise to get him going again. So he feels good. Feels like he's in a good place. This guy always been high profile, but the slider, the pitches he has, and the characteristics they have, we think will play pretty well if he's back to full health.
Derek, we were told $4 million for next year with a $1 million buyout. Is the second year also $4 million?
No, the second year is in a club option at $11 million. So we have a $1 million buyout on an $11 million option.
He was a guy that was so touted, taken after he was in the class of Garrett Cole and Trevor Bauer. Has he, I guess, what happened to him? I guess a lot of people have been trying to figure out the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, well, I think, he was obviously very highly touted, really good stuff. I remember watching him in high school. I got a chance to see him. He was regularly sitting 97 to 100, which, as a young pitcher with a good arm, that was exciting to see. I think he got into pro ball. I think threw pretty well for a good chunk of there in the early portion of his career. He did deal with some injuries that got that probably zapped a little bit of that upper end velocity, and then had to learn how to pitch and adapt. When he was traded from Baltimore to Anaheim, really, you look at that 2020, I know it was a shortened season, but what anything you could have asked of him. And I think this year, again, dealt with some of those injuries. So our hope is that if we can get him healthy and pitching, we could see a lot more of the 2020 version of Dylan over the course of a full season than we got to see this year.
You talked about the slider a bit when Dan asked, but you said dating back a couple of years, you saw him as a good fit. What about his player profile helped you kind of identify that?
Yeah, I think, going back to his Baltimore days, I think we always, he was a guy who we identified, as Dan pointed out, and you have now too, how he used his pitches, like which secondary pitches to use, when, and even just, we talked before about, we've seen some of our own guys make the adjustment to throwing four-seam fastball that has a little bit of carry, more to the top of the zone than the bottom of the zone. A few years back, that was one of his challenges, and he made some of those adjustments out in Anaheim. So it felt like, some of those have already been tapped into. Doesn't mean there aren't some opportunities for us maybe to focus a little more on some of the ways to enhance those types of changes even further.
Hey, Derek, just a little more broadly, what have kind of the last few days been like watching pitchers come off the market so quickly, knowing that that's obviously a big need of yours?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously one avenue is free agency, through the course of this conversation. We've had a lot of discussion about potential trade fits, what those could look like, trying to lay some groundwork for those really from the beginning of the offseason until now. And it's, I would say that we've looked at that as much as maybe more so than even some of the free agent conversations. But, at this point, nothing to report on that front. But I do think there's been a lot of work put into that. Obviously, the pitching market and really the starting pitching market, as much as anything, has been the most aggressive market here in the early going in the offseason. So something we're still, keeping an eye on and have had, while it's some have been probably reported in some of the conversations we've had a lot of conversations with a number of others that haven't, and just trying to stay engaged. And there's been a lot of guys with a lot of interest, and they've had a lot of choices ultimately as to where to go. And I think that's where we sit today. But getting Dylan was one of the pieces that we felt like can help us, and we're still, looking for more.
I think Thad characterized it as the biggest challenge to date in putting together a rotation. When you factor in the market, how big of a task is this?
Well, I think it's a task for every team, and I think it's rooted in a couple of different things. It's always hard, to find quality pitching and enough depth there, right? So I think that's going to be a big part of the rest of our offseason, continuing to find ways to add to it, both at the minor league level and at the major league level and non-roster level and all of the above, to try and get as much depth as possible to help us through a season. So that's a real challenge. I would say that this year, because there's a lot of teams in that market, because of what we dealt with from an injury standpoint league wide for pitching last year, I think it's even made it a bit more challenging because there's just so many players in that market. So it remains a focus of ours, but we need to focus on both free agent acquisitions, trade, and then really a lot of focus on internal development too. We look down at our minor league group, and whether it's the Joe Ryan and Bailey Obers who showed up last year, but the Josh Winders and Matt Canarinos and Joan Durans and Simeon Wood Richardson and others, we've really been focused on a lot of their planning and what they're doing to develop, because once you get to that AA, AAA level, we're hopeful those guys become part of the equation here next year soon.
You making this move with the idea that Dylan will be in your opening day rotation?
Yeah, that would be our goal, ultimately, and we'll have to see how everything plays out the rest of the way. But that's our focus. He said, he personally said to us that, like, hey, he's just looking for a way to get better. And he wants to go out there and take the ball whenever we give it to him. So I think that's always been his mentality. But our hope would be he's one of those rotation members.
And amid the talk with developing those internal guys that you have at the AA, AAA level, how many more pitchers do you think you need to add this off season in order to kind of get to the point where some of those guys are coming up later in the season?
Yeah, I don't set a perfect number. The joke's always been that, like, never enough. Like, anyone who says they have enough pitching is lying to you. There's no way to actually know if you have enough. So, we've been focused even on a lot of non-roster conversations too, to add to that depth, because those guys do come up and impact us. We saw it this year. We've seen it over the last few seasons. Make sure that we have guys that can come into that conversation. But I'm glad that we have what we have on the roster now from a young talent standpoint that we think is pretty close to being able to be a phone call away to come up and help us. The total number of pitchers, the major league level, it's at least a couple, at least a few, from a starting and rotation bullpen standpoint. So we'll stay engaged in that through the offseason.
Have you been engaged with Michael Pineda as the offseason has gone on? Has he remain a possibility to return?
Yeah, I think there's of the guys who have signed and guys who still have yet to sign. I can't imagine there's been any that I can think of on the board that we haven't at least had a conversation with. So I would say that it's accurate to say we've had a lot of that dialogue, and some are waiting out, trying to understand where the rest of the market is, where they might fit, what it might look like. Some were more eager to have that conversation sooner. So all of them are still on the board and part of our vetting process.
Hi, Derek.
Hi, Megan.
Hi. Long day. I was curious, speaking that it's a long day, just what has it kind of been like to the future of the CBA situation? Is a bit nebulous, right? Or unknown at this point or whatever. But I'm curious, like, when you're trying to, maybe get some of these signings in or have some of these conversations, like, what is a day like today like? Being that it might be a little chaotic or maybe a little bit more pressure filled than normally in an off season.
Yeah, normally at this stage of the off season, I'm at least trying to get home for dinner most nights, or at least close to, or tucking my kids into bed. These last 3 to 4 to 5 days, it's been a little less of that since we returned from the holidays. So it's just been busy. I would say that there's a lot of conversations. Obviously, we're aware of the expiration tonight. And that's we've had a lot of conversations. Agents have called a lot more often. And quite frankly, a lot of conversations with teams have been happening. So we recognize that. We're not naive to that. So it's felt a lot more like trade deadline time, so to speak. That's probably the best comparison I could give you is the 72 hours or 3 to 4 days leading into the trade deadline is what it's felt like from where I sit.
Hey, how long is the process of, oh, sorry, Phil, go ahead.
I was gonna say, conversely, what will it be like tomorrow and next week? What can you guys do and not do until it's all over?
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, the way I've looked at it is like we continue to do our business as usual until we know otherwise. That's what we've been instructed, certainly to do, from across the board, and that's how we've operated, and that's how it seems like other teams and our agent conversations have operated. If we get to a place where it's a different conversation, I'm sure we'll be given a lot more clear direction around that. But there's a lot of focus on things that we are talking about just internally. We have a whole host of minor league players that we still want to develop that we hope will be a big part of this in the short term. We still have plans for some of that programming and what we're going to do here in the months to come. So we've got plenty on our plate, certainly. And if we get to that point, I'm sure there will be some additional conversations about what we have to do next.
Just wondering, like, say you were to sign someone in the next 20 minutes, how long does the medical process take? And can you still squeeze something in potentially before the day is done?
Yeah, I'll give you as candid an answer on that as possible. I would tell you that, for every player, it's a little different. Typically in the baseball process, if you're trading for a player, all you get is you review the medicals of the player, right? Codes get shared back and forth. They go from team to team, in the middle of a trade. And so same thing, agents will share medical, code information so we can evaluate and our trainers can. It doesn't always involve an hands-on, physical through the process. So I would tell you that, like, for us, it depends on the situation and the player, the contract, what the exposure is, and then ultimately what the injury history is. There's oftentimes you'll review a player's medical file and there's really nothing in there, right? And there's nothing to speak of, a rolled ankle or something really small, and we have all that information. We would expect through that process that there wouldn't be much else to find, or there's a guy who's had surgery or multiple surgeries and we need to really get a good sense for where things are medically for that player. So I think it depends on that, right? Like the difference between those types of players and the type of commitment. But I feel like we'll see from a trade standpoint, things like that. We do that normally. We wouldn't get a physical process through that. We'd review medicals and navigate. So we're treating it much more like the trade deadline at this point.
I know Pineda got asked about, have there been any talk of a reunion with Dick Mountain / Rich Hill?
I probably answered the exact same way. I mean, I think, we've had conversations with representatives for all of those mentioned, some who've been here before and those who haven't. So, in some cases it's really individual it's been individual to the agent and the player as to how they want to navigate, a little bit of uncertainty here, in terms of just trying to get some clarity sooner versus later. And I think some may be more comfortable, waiting to see what transpires than others. But so that's it. I mean, we've been in touch with all those players.
Do you expect to sign Trevor Gill?
Have we not? Not sure we've announced
we have not
all of our minor league signings. So maybe we probably will do that here, Dustin, at some point. But yes, yeah, short version is yes. We had that conversation through the course of this process, and in some ways allows us a chance as a minor league player and signed player and someone we can actually engage with going forward as well too. So we expect that. Yep.
And you can, like you say, engage with all of your non-union members, all of the minor league players. So in Fort Myers, camps can still go on in the month.
Correct. Yep. Correct. Yep. We can we can, anyone who's not a covered player under the union would be part of the conversation.
And can you discuss trades? You said you've been working on trades, but nothing has happened. Can you discuss trades with other teams?
No, what we've been instructed to this point is that, if this transpires with the next steps in this, there would be no transaction. There would be transaction freeze on that. So there wouldn't be conversations around that. But again, probably, should this in the next few hours track this way, I would imagine we'll get more direction around that in the next day.
Atención fanáticos del Perlantillada, llegando ya la carrera estelar entre los programas deportivos. En la casilla número 1, Héctor Gómez. Le sigue en la casilla número 2, Tenchi Rodríguez. En la casilla número 13, Franklin Mirabal. Y en la casilla número 4, la máquina deportiva de Odiel Batista. Todo listo, fanático, a correr, fanático, sale la delantera, Héctor Gómez, seguido por Franklin Mirabal, Franklin Mirabal, llegando casi al segundo lugar la máquina deportiva de Odiel Batista. Cuidado que Tenchi Rodríguez está en segundo lugar, apretando, se adueña del tercer lugar Franklin Mirabal, seguido por Héctor Gómez, que está puntica, caco con Franklin Mirabal. Tenchi Rodríguez está perdiendo velocidad, la máquina deportiva ya está en segundo lugar, ampliando, ya llegando a la curva de la Paraguay, la máquina deportiva, Franklin Mirabal. La máquina deportiva, Franklin Mirabal está caco llegando a la recta final. Franklin Mirabal está por sacar la delantera, pero Odiel Batista no se lo permite. La máquina deportiva, Odiel Batista, Franklin Mirabal, Odiel Batista, Franklin Mirabal, Odiel Batista. Y es la máquina deportiva, amigos fanáticos, que se lleva la victoria en esta carrera por los programas deportivos. Felicidades para el ejemplar Odiel Batista montando la yegua a la máquina deportiva. Buenas tardes desde la Perlantillada.